Welcome back, everybody. This is the Goldfishing playtest video for my Zimone Mystery Unraveler Commander deck. I actually made a full deck tag for this deck, which I'll have linked down in the description below. This is the companion video to go along with that deck tag. So in that video, you get all the individual card discussions and strategy for the deck, what we're trying to achieve. In this video, I'm going to take it through its paces with a couple of different playtesting sessions with varying levels of interaction to see how the deck performs. Before we hop into it, I'd just like to ask if you like this sort of content, leave a like on the video and subscribe if you want to see more Magic content like this. So I've made a couple of changes to this deck since I actually recorded that deck tech video. After further playtesting, I just decided that there were some tweaks that needed to be made to get the most performance out of this deck. I'll have those on the screen with accompanying rationale. Feel free to pause the video and read that. So this will be playtesting with the most updated version of that deck. And then I just wanted to give you guys a couple of tips when it comes to this particular play style or this particular commander deck. You should always be conscious of the fact that you can turn your morph or manifest creatures face up, or I should say specifically the manifest creatures, you can turn face up by paying their mana cost. Sometimes I get in the mindset of always just looking at them face down and just forgetting the fact that I can cast them. So just a quick reminder there, you can always be casting your manifests if you need static abilities and so forth. And also, when you are actually playing out this deck in paper, feel free to just take a little piece of note paper or notepad or something, write down what the manifests and morphs are so that you constantly don't have to be looking underneath the creatures and taking up time at the table. I will also say that this deck does force you to make a lot of choices because you are basically having a second hand with your manifest creatures on the battlefield. So it can be tough to really go through all of the different options. Practicing this deck is great to be able to play it speedily. So with that out of the way, let's hop into the playtester here. And so what we're looking for is at least 3 lands. We always want to have a land heavy hand with Zimone because we want to be able to cast Zimone on turn 5 so that we can have that extra land, preferably a fetch land, to be able to get the double landfall trigger. So I'm seeing here we have Curator Beastie, which is going to be a nice counter synergy. We have 5 lands, which I will actually take because this deck is very land hungry, and we have a piece of ramp with a form of Kami of Whispered Hopes, which is also +1/+1 counter synergy, and we have a bunch of fetch lands. So I think this is about as perfect as we could actually ask for, and I believe we'll be able to assemble a lethal board state by about turn 6 or turn 7 here. So we'll go ahead and start us off with a forest, and I'm actually going to organize these a little bit here so that we have our non-lands in the front organized by mana cost, and then we have our lands in the back. Okay, so forest goes out first. We want to save our fetch lands for later. And then I'm seeing here we've got a few choices in fetch lands. So Fabled Passage can be untapped. The rest of these are tapped fetch lands. Demo Field we can play here. We definitely want to play Kami on turn 3. So I'm thinking we actually play one of our tapped fetch lands here. So let's go the Meister's Theater, although this allows us to get a island or swamp or mountain. So let's go Meister's Theater. We'll play it and then crack it right away. We'll search up an island out of our lovely deck here. And also I'll just comment really quick that with all of the different +1/+1 counter actions and all of just the various flipping and unflipping actions with the archetype playtester, this might take me a little bit longer to actually process a lot of the actions that need to be taken here. So, okay, so turn 3, I'm thinking we actually play out our demo field because we don't want to quite play a fetch land yet. We want to save all of our fetch lands for Zimone later. So this will enter and can tap for colorless. So then we'll cast our Kami of Whispered Hopes. Now this creature says if one or more +1/+1 counters will be put on permanent control, that many +1 are put on that permanent instead, and it can tap to add X many of any one color where X is its power. Great. Okay, so now we've got a total of 4 mana, so we are going to immediately cast Zimone without even a second thought. This is our #1 play we want to make within most games. Then we have the opportunity to play a fetch land to get the Manifest Dread trigger and flip. So we're going to cast play, I should say, the Riveteer's Overlook, which will allow us to search up a forest. So let's actually play this. We will manifest Dread. So we've got a Forgotten Ancient, and then we've got an Experiment 12. I believe Forgotten Ancient is a little bit better than Experiment 12. However, now that I'm looking at it, we do have a lot of fetch lands in our hand, so we're going to be planning to turn a lot of permanents face up with Zimone. So here's where I would say, okay, if there's a control deck at the table and we anticipate Zimone to be removed, I would go with Forgotten Ancient. But if we're a little bit more free to, maybe we're adding more of a battle cruiser type of a table, I'd probably take the Experiment 12 because Experiment 12 is a little bit more reliant on the Zimone flip up triggers. The more that I think about it, I think Forgotten Ancient will generate more 1/1 counters overall, so we'll actually put that on the battlefield, and then Experiment 12 will go in our graveyard. Okay, now this will enter face down, and I'm just going to mark this in the Archetype playtester as being face down, but we will know that this is a 2/2. So then Riveteer's Overlook will be cracked on entering, and then we will search us up a forest card. So let's grab a forest. Plenty of basics to keep us fueled here, and that will enter tapped. So now we'll have the second Zimone trigger, so we will turn a permanent control face up. Boom, we've got Forgotten Ancient. So whenever a player casts a spell, you may put a +++ counter on it. At the beginning of your upkeep, you may move any number of 1/1 counters from Forgotten Ancient onto other creatures. Now this combos with Kami of Whispered Hopes to generate us a ton of mana, which is pretty great. Okay, so then we'll go into next turn. Now during our opponent's turns, we're going to assume that Forgotten Ancient generates, we'll say conservatively 3 1/1 counters that each opponent will cast one spell. So then we'll assume that then at the beginning of our upkeep, we'll be able to move 3 1/1 counters from Forgotten Ancient onto other creatures, and we'll put it all onto Kami of Whispered Hopes. So, or actually, I'm sorry, that would be then 6 1/1 counters, because with Kami, they would be amplified up to 6 total, and then we will move all of those onto the Kami of Whispered Hopes. So let's actually go ahead and add 6 1/1 counters. So it would be 3 spells being cast, but it's amplified. Each one is added additionally from Kami, so we got a total of 6 there. Okay, so now our Kami is 7 mana, and by turn 5, we have a total of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 plus 7, so 12 mana by turn 5. My goodness, is this getting crazy. Okay, so let's think about this. So now we have a fetch land to play, and I see that we have an AC in our hand, which can generate us a lot of card advantage. We also have a Benevolent Hydra, which can then pump up our Forgotten Ancient, Curator Beastie as well. So Patron Wizard, I think, is a high priority play at this point in time to negate potential board wipes. Or at least disincentivize board wipes by being able to tap it and Zimone to force an opponent to pay 2 extra for their board wipe. And I don't think most of our opponents would have enough to cast a board wipe with what they would have, or whatever ramp they have, even in the early game. So I think at this point, our best play is maybe an AC to generate just a ton of landfall triggers here. Although let me think about this. So if we play the AC first, that means that our first landfall trigger will draw 2, or our first fetch land we play rather, will draw us 2 cards. And then we'll get the Zimone flip trigger. Now, is there anything we want to play before we play the AC that cares about that extra land coming in? And I don't think we do, although Curator Beastie will allow us to, although we don't have enough mana for Curator Beastie. So let me think about this. So we have 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. And then if we play the Fabled Passage, we would have 12. So maybe we actually do, oh, but we're going to skip out on that extra landfall trigger. Okay, so that means we probably can't play the Curator Beastie, so maybe the play then is to just go AC into Patron Wizard. And do we have the 4 mana? I believe we have the 4 mana to cast the blue pips, and then we would just use one of the forests for a green, and then move on from there. So maybe we actually do this. If we play our AC first, let's do this. See, this is the hard part about this deck, is sequencing all of these value pieces here. So let's go, we'll tap Kami for a total of 7. Tapped for 7, plus the forest is 8. So we've got 2 blue floating left. So then we'll use the 2 blue floating plus our island to cast the Patron Wizard. Okay, and now we've got ourselves a Fabled Passage we can play. So let's go Fabled Passage. We will crack this, but we do need to resolve some landfall triggers. So first we'll have the Zimone trigger. Let's do Zimone triggers first, I'm thinking. Okay, so we've got a Flooded Strand. Unfortunately, none of these are creatures, so that's okay. We will go, well, actually, we'll do the Valgavost Onslaught onto the battlefield just in case we come to something that allows us to play lands from our graveyard. So this will be untapped. Or I'm sorry, face down, not untapped. Then we still can crack our fetch land, but we have an AC trigger, so let's draw a card off of AC. Okay, so then let's crack the Fabled Passage then to search us up. We'll say perhaps an island. Oh, I'm sorry. We actually do need to search for the forest for the double green off of the Benevolent Hydra. So let me just redo that here really quick. So let's go forest, and then we'll move that to the battlefield, and then we can tap our double green for our Benevolent Hydra. So this then will allow us to, with the Kami, to stack a ton of counters on Forgotten Ancient. Then we'll have an AC trigger with that forest entering to then draw a card, and we'll have a Zimone trigger, which will actually pass on. So we will actually send the signal to our opponent that this is not a creature, but we will be able to draw a card. Okay, so now we are able to play an additional land. So let's play the Yavimaya at this point in time to save our fetch lands for a future turn. So now our demo field can tap free green, which is pretty great. And then do we have any other plays here? I believe we are Dunsies. Okay, so now let's see. So this will be a 1/1, and then we'll have our Forgotten Ancient triggers, assuming that it still is able to survive on the battlefield, and then we'll be able. I'm going to assume that we'll have to tap our Patron Wizard and Zimone to then negate some sort of counter spell. But once again, Forgotten Ancient will use our conservative assumption of 3 spells being cast. So with that amplified with Kami, and then with that amplified off of Benevolent Hydra. What we want to do then is, so we would get 3 spellcasts, which is amplified to 9, I believe. So let's add 9 1/1 counters, and we'll jack this up to 9. Okay, so then we'll go to next turn. We have an upkeep trigger off of Forgotten Ancient, and here is where things start to get really scary for our opponents. Now we can start spreading the 1/1 counters, which are then amplified by the Benevolent Hydra and the Kami. So if we take actually all of 9 of our 1/1 counters, and we spread 1 to Patron Wizard, 1 here, 1 here, 1 here, 1 here, 1 here, that would allow us to spread a total of, let's see, so let's do this here. So let's remove all 9 of these, and that should, so let's actually do this in order. Okay, so we'll then put 3 1/1 counters onto Benevolent Hydra from that being amplified off the Kami and Benevolent Hydra, and this will go down 1 counter. And we'll do the same thing here, and then 1, and then this will go up 3 1 counters, and this will go down 1, and do the same thing here. This is super fun here. Okay, and we'll just add another 3 counters, and then go here, and then I believe we can. So, and then we'd probably just keep the 1/1 counters on Forgotten Ancient maybe, although maybe we just do want to spread the rest of these to Kami Whispered Hopes. So it will be a total of 4 1/1 counters, so these won't be amplified onto the Kami because we've already taken the multiplication or the additive replacement effect from the others, so this will just be a straight power buff here. So now we just have a ridiculous amount of mana. This is absolutely absurd. So with an extra landfall trigger, we could play our Terramorphic Expanse. So then not only do we have just a giant board state, we'll just go quickly through turn 6 here. So we've got a Terramorphic Expanse. We'll get a landfall trigger off of AC to draw 1. We'll manifest Dread for alt 2. Oh my god, a Consecrated Sphinx. We'll move that to battlefield immediately. We'll crack the Terramorphic Expanse. We'll search ourselves up an island. That will go to the battlefield tapped. Then we will flip the Consecrated Sphinx. We'll draw a card off of AC's landfall trigger. And then I believe we could then play, and that's without even playing any mana. That's just our landfall trigger for the turn. So then at this point in time, I think we could just, honestly, if there's something scary on the field, we could then play and flip the Chrome Shell Crab for its morph cost. We've also got Overlord of the Hauntwoods here to generate another landfall trigger, although we don't have any Manifest Dread abilities. We've got a Curator Beastie and a Null Drifter, so, and then we've got a pretty much lethal board state at this point in time. So assuming that we have if we have 13 mana, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19 mana, we could cast essentially every let's see, so we could go 5 plus 8, so that's 13 plus another 6. We could cast the Curator Beastie, hard cast the Overlord, and then morph and or play and then morph the Chrome Shell Crab, and then from there we would generate ourselves another land, which I believe enters tapped, but it doesn't matter. And then let's just see next turn what we would be able to work with here, because then we would draw, I believe we could play an additional land here, so then we would play our second land, So maybe we do that first before all this happens. The Abhorrent Oculus, we could exile all the stuff from our graveyard to start manifesting Dread, and then from there, we would be able to draw with Null Drifter on turn 7 and turn 8, and then play our 2 additional fetch lands to then start flipping up everything that's manifested off of the Abhorrent Oculus. So that is incredible. And that's assuming that Zimone is not removed. Now, let's start a new game, but we'll assume that Zimone encounters a heavier level of interaction. So I'd say that particular playtest was lethal board state by turn 7. Okay, so we have 3 lands here, and I think this is going to be pretty much a keeper. Let's see, does Obscure allow us to get an island? Okay, it does, which is perfect because we are going to need that blue to cast the Reality Chip, Uro, and Polywog Prodigy. Okay, so let's keep this, and we'll go turn 1. We've got an Insidious Fungus, which we'll put up here. So Insidious Fungus is going to allow us to maybe ramp a land, but it's going to be some nice removal there. So let's go Obscure Storefront. That's going to be sacked for an island. So let's go ahead and grab one of our islands that will go to battlefield tapped. Then we'll go next. All right, so we've got a forest here. So for two mana, I think I probably want to cast the Polywog Prodigy so we can start stacking counters on it to start drawing cards. So that's great. Turn 3, we're going to go for a forest here. So we have a total of 3 mana, and we are going to start stacking Evolve triggers onto Polywog Prodigy. We're really desperate for lands here because we want to ensure that we get an extra, or next turn we'll be able to cast Zimone. I think, honestly, the play here is to just drop Uro for 3. So when it ETB sacrifices, it lands escapes, and when it ETBs or attacks, you gain 3 life and draw a card. Then you put a land card from your hand onto the battlefield. So let's sack it because it did not escape. Then we will draw a card, gain 3 life, and then put a land. Okay, we did not hit the land. Well, that kind of sucks. But we will get the Polywog Prodigy counter increase here. So whenever an opponent casts a non-creature spell with mana value less than Polywog Prodigy's power, draw a card. So right now, we would draw cards off of 1-drops. So I'm going to assume our opponents probably won't play any 1-drops. I think that's pretty fair. So we'll go next. We're a little bit stifled here without being able to cast Zimone by turn 4, but that's okay. We've got a Secure Tri-Builder and an Insidious Fungus, and I think what I want to do is actually just play the Secure Tri-Builder and the Insidious Fungus here for 3. We'll just crack the Steve on our opponent's turns, perhaps in response to declaring as blockers. We won't get any Polywog Prodigy triggers, but the Steve will allow us to grab, let's see, do we want a forest or an island? I'm thinking we probably want, let's grab an island. Okay, move to battlefield. That will enter tapped on our opponent's turns. Okay, so now we do have another ramp trigger in the bank here with Insidious Fungus. So we're a turn behind. This is not super great here, but what I think I want to do is potentially just cast Zimone, and then we'll crack the Insidious Fungus in addition to playing the Reality Chip next turn if we brick on a land draw next turn. So let's cast Zimone for 4. So now Polywog Prodigy will be increased, and now I think we can assume that we do draw at least 1 card on our opponent's turn cycle, but we are playing a naked Zimone without value, so that kind of sucks. But here we're seeing the other side of the coin. So now let's go next, and we'll assume that we do draw 1 card off of our opponent's turn, and then we'll go next. Okay, so we drew a land. Let's actually assume that we have a feel bad. Let's assume that Zimone was immediately targeted. People know what this commander is all about, so Zimone goes back into the command zone. I think that's pretty fair in a higher power setting. Okay, so now we need 6 mana to cast Zimone, so I think we're still in ramp mode at this point then. So in this case, I think I would probably look at casting, if we played the Prismatic Vista, we have 5, so that means if we crack the Insidious Fungus, we would have 3 left, meaning we could then cast our Elvish Reclaimer and the Reality Chip. So I think that's our move. So let's go Prismatic Vista. We'll crack it, throwing all caution to the wind here for holding on to our lands at least. So now we can cast our Elvish Reclaimer for 1. Then I think we will cast our Reality Chip for 2. And then none of this is triggering Polywog. We will tap our last 2 here to crack the Insidious Fungus to draw a card. Then you may put a land card from your hand on the battlefield tapped. Okay, so let's draw a card, and we missed that land trigger. Man, okay, this one is a rougher one. Now though we do have the necessary or we have Elvish Reclaimer, which can grab us the Simic Growth Chamber, which will for sure get us a land back to our hand. Okay, turn 7. This is still looking rough. Our opponents probably have, at least somebody has popped off significantly at this point and is threatening a pretty big board state. We're going to not assume that Prodigy draws us a card, just being uber conservative with this particular playtest. So now we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Unfortunately, we don't have the 6 to cast Zimone. So let's go for probably the Cabaret Courtyard to get that land. So let's first reconfigure the reality chip to attach to the Elvish Reclaimer. So now with the Elvish Reclaimer, we can look at the top card of our library, and then we can play lands if it's on the top of our library. Let's not do that. So, okay, so that leaves us the 2 then to then tap Elvish Reclaimer to sack. We'll look for a Simic Growth Chamber, pick up a land, put it into our hand. Okay. And that will actually ramp us as well. So then we'll go next, and by now we're probably pretty low on life with our opponents, probably having a semi-lethal board state assembled by now. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So now we can recast Zimone. Let's just see if we can generate ourselves a bunch of blockers. So let's go Zimone, and then we've got a Cabaret Courtyard to play. So that's going to enter. We're going to Manifest Dread with Zimone, and then we're going to grab a Defiler of Vigor. That will go on to the battlefield to start stacking up counters, and this will go to the graveyard, and that will be upside down, or face down rather. Then we'll get the Cabaret Courtyard, which will search for a forest. So let's put that in the graveyard. We will search ourselves up a forest. Move that to battlefield tapped. Okay, so then we can flip this face up. Defiler Vigor. Now everything in our hand, we can pay the 2 life to be 1 less in casting cost. Polyweb Prodigy will get a trigger to then grow in size. Now let's assume that we draw a card off of Polyweb Prodigy, and we are going to have to discard down to hand size here. We will discard, at this point in time, we probably are not looking for a lure effect with Tree Shaker Chimera, so let's just throw that into the graveyard. So now we'll assume Polyweb Prodigy draws this card, and then we go next turn. Okay, so now here's when we can sort of pop off, assuming that we are still alive at this point in the game. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 mana to play with, and our green spells cost 1 less. Okay, so we're going to tap for 7. So let's go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So let's drop the AC first. Okay, so we're going to pay the 2 life, so AC will enter for 5 mana. We're going to play our forest, I believe, and then we will draw a card off of AC, and then I believe Polyweb Prodigy at this point will then trigger once more. So now we've got a Zimone Manifest Dread trigger, so let's resolve that. We'll grab the Glen Alendra. That will go to battlefield face down. And then we can also play an additional land here with AC. So we've got a Talon Gates and an Evolving Wilds. Let's actually go for the... we can save the Talon Gates for protection, but we do want to probably generate as large of a board state as we can at this point in time. So if we were to play the Talon Gates, we could then play 1 more creature here. So let's actually do the Master Biomancer. So if we tap for... Actually, no, we can do 3 and then just play the Evolving Wilds. Okay, so let's do Master Biomancer. Boom. Each other creature will enter with number 1 counters equal to its power and is immune in addition to its other types. So now, with our second landfall trigger, we will get the Evolving Wilds, and then we will... we'll get the flip-up trigger from Zimone. We will draw a card off of AC. This will then be cracked, or maybe we'll actually save it. We could save it. That's fine. Okay, we'll save it for next turn. So let's see. So I believe I did that correctly. And then next turn, and then whenever you cast a green permanent spell. Okay, so we haven't, we've casted 1 green permanent spell, so I believe the 1/1 counters will go on to the Defiler. Oops, and that's not supposed to be put on there. Elvish Reclaimer is +1, and I do realize now we can look at the top cover of our library because with the reality chip. and cast spells from the top of our library. Okay, so then Pollard Prodigy will have gotten, well, let's see, when you cast a green, okay, so then Pollard Prodigy would still be at its current power toughness because of the AC enter, but it wouldn't have triggered, the AC's power wouldn't have triggered it because it would already had the 1/1 counter, so then Zimone gets a counter, and I believe the AC would get the counter as well from the Master Biomancer. Not entirely sure on that, but there's a lot going on here. So then we'll just go to next turn. Okay, so then we've got at least 3 landfall triggers at this point in time. So turn 10, I think we would probably want to save 1 for the Glen Alendra, and then let's see if we can just start stacking as much power on these fellas as we can. So we would definitely play the Terramorphic Expanse to then Manifest Dread off of Zimone. Dreamtide Whale, absolutely will take the Dreamtide Whale. Then we would crack that, and then we'll be face down, and then we would grab probably an island, I'm thinking, to spread it out just a little bit. Then let's see, so that island will enter tapped, and then we still got our Evolving Wilds trigger here, which I think maybe we would just want to crack maybe next turn. We do have 2 draw triggers off of AC. Just looking for anything that can buff our power on board at this point, because we're probably facing down a lethal board state from our opponents. Master Biomancer will allow us to enter with 2/1 counters, so we'll do that. Let's see, and then I think that's it. That's just our land drop for the turn. So maybe we will look for, let's see, so we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 mana. So with the Defiler of Vigor, I think we want to just spam out as many creatures as possible to start buffing up our board. So with 8 mana, this would cost 1, this would cost 1, this would cost 3, so that would put us up to 5, and then Forgotten Ancient as well. So then we would go 1, 2, 3, 4. 4 creatures then. So, oh, and I guess Megamorph does count as casting. That's pretty cool. So anyway, Defiler Vigor will put 4 1/1 counters on everything we control at this point in time. And that will allow us to then, oh, and I believe, I don't know if I flipped up this creature. So with the land entering from the Terramorphic Expanse, this will flip up. So we'll have the Dreamtide Whale, and then we will have our second spell here. So Defiler Vigor will put 2, so it would be 2 1/1 counters, because we would stack the Defiler Vigor trigger first. So this would get 2 1/1 counters. This would get 2 1/1 counters. This would get 2 counters as well. This as well. This as well. This as well. This as well. And now everything is entering with 4 1/1 counters. So these technically haven't entered yet. And we've tapped all of our mana, minus the Evolving Wilds being cracked. So now we would have a Dreamtide Whale trigger whenever a player casts their second spell each turn, Proliferate. So now we would increase these all by 1, and then we increase this by 1, and by 1 again. And then our last cards here we would be able to play would be the Den Protector and the Experiment 12. And then that will, both of these will actually enter with, actually those are the counters off that. I would not, because he cast it, so I'm going to cards. Then the Den Protector, when this enter is going to counter on the island and everything else, I believe, so they need to, 1 everything again, 1 everything again, 1 everything again, 1 everything. And then the Experiment, and then this will enter with a total of 6 1/1 counters. That's pretty insane. Okay. Just making fatties out of nowhere here. 4, 5, 6, and then Experiment 12 will then put another 1/1 counter on everything. Just a lot of dice movement here if you're playing this in paper, but my goodness, is this just a wildly powerful board state out of absolutely nowhere. So let's say our opponents had taken pity on us, they would be sorely regretting that decision. So then this will, and technically that is on cast that it gets the counters, so then this will enter with a total of 7 1/1 counters being buffed off the Master Biomancer, I think, something like that. So now we have a lethal board state by turn 10. Okay, so this shows a good range of the deck's speed, I think, assuming that in the second playtest, we assume that Zimone encountered a larger proportion of interaction. And here we can also see how much little crap you have to deal with. You have to tinker with your board a lot. I've noticed this deck is very just action intensive. Like if you're shuffling or you're putting counters on things, this deck tends to take longer longer turns, so just be aware of that. And this is where, you know, practicing the deck makes you speed it up quite a bit. But even if we were to get hit with a board wipe at this point in time in the game by turn 10, boom, we would just play a Consecrated Sphinx right onto an empty board and draw ourselves at least 6 cards to start rebuilding. And then we do have enough mana to be able to recast Zimone for 8 mana, which is pretty awesome. So we're really covered there. It's just we would be fearing that board wipe and our opponents kicking us out of the pod for taking too long with our turns. Okay, so that's the video, guys. Thank you all for watching. I think I'll just wrap it up there. Once again, Zimone Mystery Unraveler, high power, can assemble a gigantic board state and really pops around turn 6 or 7, but it can take us up to about turn 10 to really get going. So that is a video. If you enjoyed it, leave a like and subscribe if you want to see more. And I apologize, this last playtest version, there's just a lot going on, so it's hard to keep track of that with Architect. So yeah, that's the video, guys. Hopefully you all enjoyed it, and we'll see you in the next one.